I've been really looking forward to this event. We have a gentleman here who knows everything there is about peacekeeping. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Harvey retired recently after 40 years with the Irish Defence Forces. He was involved in operations at many flashpoints, including on the border with Northern Ireland during the Troubles, but also in South Lebanon, Chad, Kosovo, and the South Caucasus, which I had to look up. I gather it's between Russia and Iran, is that right?
That's right.
Yep, excellent. Lieutenant Colonel Harvey has written a raft of books, including Soldiering Against Subversion, the Irish Defence Forces and Internal Security During the Troubles. And that turned out to be quite a prophetic book, we'll talk about that. And also his most recent book is A Bloody Dawn, The Irish at D-Day, which came out this year. So a big welcome to Lieutenant Colonel Harvey.
Congo's vast natural resources of mineral wealth were in stark contrast to its people's poverty. An enormous country, Congo's former colonial history had been brutal. Yet its independence in 1960 swiftly brought it towards, then beyond, the brink of bloodshed. A huge humanitarian tragedy was in the offing, and the country itself faced fragmentation. Now Katanga, its primary province, was perched perilously on the precipice of pandemonium. Congo's abundance of raw materials, timber, ivory, rubber, and vast quantities of minerals were quickly monopolized by Belgian firms paying high dividends to Leopold for the privilege. Inevitably, envious competing interests from others, including British businesses unable to gain a highly lucrative market share, exploited the concerns of outspoken missionaries over the shockingly inhumane treatment of the Congolese and raised such concerns in the British Parliament. As a result, in mid-1903, Roger Casement at the British Council in the Congo was directed to conduct an investigation. By year's end, after a thorough, systematic and highly conscientious undertaking, his report laid bare in graphic detail the maltreatment being meted out to the Congolese, including the severing of hands which were then preserved by a smoking process, proof of money not wasted on bullets. Casement's report earned him a knighthood and caused widespread condemnation and criticism of Leopold II. The resultant international hue and cry led to Belgium itself being given control of Leopold II's personal African fiefdom. However, the horrors did not fade overnight. Diamonds, uranium, and other minerals from Congo's seemingly inexhaustible supply of valuable natural resources soon replaced timber, ivory, and wild rubber as income-earning exports for the Belgians. It was shortly after the First World War that the province of Katanga, where vast resources of copper had been discovered in 1913, attracted fortune-seeking European and American mining and mineral firms led by Union Mine, a large Anglo-Belgian concern. It became one of the most highly lucrative mining centres in the world, accounting for 50% of Congo's wealth. Granted sudden independence, the Congo, with huge mineral wealth but no public administration layer, was unable to impose control on its so-called army to ensure stability and security, its new government's first duty, and the result was chaos. This disintegration arose directly from two speeches, the first by King Baudouin of Belgium, the second by Patrice Lumumba, the new Prime Minister of the Congo. In his address to the Congolese, Baudouin encouraged them to be deserving of the advantages granted by his grandfather, Leopold II, a personage hugely disliked throughout Congo. Insulted, Patrice Lumumba set aside his prepared conciliatory speech, instead delivering an impassioned denunciation of the Belgians, which had immediate repercussions. Political opportunists seized the momentum, the army mutinied, and many tribesmen sought reprisals for generations of white supremacy. Precious metals were at the heart of the madness, some of which were used in the manufacture of jet engines and radar apparatus. Moreover, Katanga supplied a tenth of the world's copper and over half of the world's cobalt. There was also uranium and many minerals, including large quantities of diamonds. Thus, 10% of Congo's population generated 50% of the nation's income, and the Katanganese wanted to protect their interests, as did those European entities that had much to lose and more to gain. Enter the boots of the Casse Bleu, the blue helmets of the UN, onto Central African soil and headlong into the Congolese maelstrom. The UN was in at the deep end from the beginning, and the pace of events was moving rapidly. Today, we take it for granted that Irish soldiers should serve alongside those of other nations in UN peacekeeping missions worldwide. Yet, when first requested to do so, it was an entirely new departure, as Ireland began to move into the mainstream of the current world events. It was the beginning of a new outward-looking era for the nation. Thousands of people lined the streets as the first Congo-bound battalion marched through the centre of Dublin. Irish troops going to the Congo was highly symbolic of our newly found state independence taking its place in the world. The experience of overseas service in the Congo was a shock. It was not the first time Irish soldiers served overseas. 2 years previously, 50 individual officers went as observers to the Middle East. The Congo 1960 to 1964 was different. It was the Defence Force's first ever armed troop participatory peacekeeping mission. The experience of overseas service in the Congo was a sudden, eye-opening, revelatory, extreme exposure for the Irish Defence Forces, especially when you consider what it then was. The 1960 Defence Forces was very small, inactive, with antiquated equipment, deficient in resources, and had neither policy nor direction. In short, neglected, skeletal, if you like, without the bones of a proper framework or the flesh of any fighting capability. At best, a light infantry force. Defence was the victim amongst government departments, and very little of the scarce monies available was spent on it. Conditions were unsatisfactory, pay was poor, and it was choked by civil service control. The Defence Forces was a barrack-bound army, sedentary, old, and as obsolete as their equipment. With Congo drifting towards civil war, the UN was requested to put in a peacekeeping force to stabilise the situation and stop Katanga from succeeding. Peacekeeping is not mentioned in the UN Charter. It evolved out of necessity. Peacekeeping is not for soldiers, but only soldiers can do it, is a very famous quote of the then UN General Secretary, Dag Hammarskjöld, and he was proved to be correct. Peacekeepers are often sent to mission areas where there is no peace to be kept. Peacekeeping is regarded by soldiers as strange soldiering, because peacekeeping means waiting to be fired on before firing back, not escalating the firefight, diffusing the tension, pouring cold water on the fire, and if engaged in an ever-increasing escalating firefight, only responding to the increasing intensification of incoming support weapons, heavy machine guns and mortars, before responding in like manner. So, it is adherence to a strict rules of engagement, where protagonists engage you without adhering to such rules. There are certain critical variables that affect the always uncertain feasibility of a peacekeeping force achieving a successful outcome. A clear and workable mandate, the nature of the conflict, consent of the parties involved, the physical environment, the extent of international support or interference, and both the appropriate configuration and means available to the peacekeeping force. The degree to which all, some, most of these determinants were present and played out has a significant bearing on what the peacekeeping force was able to achieve. The Irish Defence Force involvement in overseas peacekeeping service was to prove the single biggest, most significant development in the history of the Defence Forces. The Irish Defence Force involvement in the Congo was to involve it in a number of significant critical moments, when Irish soldiers as peacekeepers first walked the very fine lines between peacekeeping, peace enforcing, and war fighting. At the outset of its involvement in the Congo, little known was that it would shortly involve tragedy and trauma, death and killing, and a complete loss of innocence. Stressful, critical moments of acute intensity were to occur and be experienced by the Irish troops in the Congo. The first such was to be a huge reality check, like none other before or since, and was the single worst loss of life suffered by the Defence Forces ever on overseas service. And I am, of course, talking about the Nyemba ambush. In the thick bush and tall elephant grass either side of the Manono Road, on both sides of a damaged 20-foot bridge over the river Luwei, 13 miles from Nyemba, on the 8th of November 1960, a large Baluba war party, baptized with magic water, hyped up by tribal ritual, fired up by passionate pep talk, lay in wait for 11-man patrol from the 33rd Irish Battalion under the command of Lieutenant Gleeson and Sergeant Gaynor. I'm now going to read you a letter from a sergeant in the Congo, written to his commanding officer back home. The sergeant was one of those sent out on patrol to seek out the situation, having received reports of the prior patrol being ambushed. This is a letter dated the 27th of November 1960 and is from Sergeant Salty, his nickname, to his commanding officer at home. Dear Sir, this is a very hard letter to write, as there is so much to be said and so much that must be left unsaid. But I will make a start somehow. I was in hospital in Kamena, where I received your very welcome letter and package of player cigarettes. Thanks a lot. I was after coming from my tea on Saturday evening and was trick acting with another sergeant. I was chasing him into the billet when he slammed the door, and I put my left hand up to stop it, but unlucky me, it was a glass door and my left hand went through it. I lost a fair bit of blood and received 16 stitches and 8 clips, and as I write this letter, it is not healed yet. I left hospital the following Saturday and arrived in Albertville Sunday, and found that instead of getting a rest, the company was getting it sewn into them far worse than in Kamena. The work routine was hard. And then, of course, that Monday night, we were alerted to go on patrol at 0400 hours the following morning. But we were not told about the trouble at that stage. 0400 hours Tuesday, Battalion HQ, getting ready to move, Father Crowley, having experienced, knew there was something wrong at this stage, and then I was told confidentially that the patrol was ambushed and that there was 3 killed, 1 injured, and the remainder missing, and was told for definite that Lieutenant Gleeson and Sergeant Gaynor were dead. I could not believe it, even though the flag was half-mast. It was hard to describe our feelings, knowing it was the truth, but still holding out hope that it might be a mistake. We moved out on the road from Nyamba, and after about 3 hours hard going, we got there. Just before we got to Nyamba, we had to cross a bridge that was torn up and then move through the village and trading area that was after being pillaged and looted by Baluba cats. And then we climbed a small hill to where the remainder of number 2 platoon was, and there we got the full details. 5 dead, 5 missing, 1 found. The first man Corporal Feeney saw was his brother, alive, and he cried with relief. We then went to where the ambush occurred. An Ethiopian patrol plus a couple of number 2 platoon were already at the scene when we arrived and were taking out the bodies. What I'm going to tell you now, keep to yourself, because I do not know what was given out in the press at home. The first 5 bodies were so badly beaten that it was hard to recognize them. It was horribly savage. We came back to camp with the 5 lads, and there was many a tear shed for them. We took off again at 0800 hours and went to look for the remainder, and on the way, Private Kenny staggered out of the jungle. He was a sorry sight to see, but came to gladden our hearts as he was the second one saved. He had 2 arrows sticking out of his right cheek of his behind. The back of his head was busted open and his left hand mashed. How he survived 2 days in jungle, no one will ever know. Now here's a bouquet for young Trooper Brown. According to Kenny, only for Brown he would be dead. It seemed that there was a crowd beating Kenny, and Brown opened up on them and drew them away from him. They all followed Brown, and long afterwards he could hear Brown still firing, and he said that if Brown had not fired himself, he himself would have got away, and as you know by now, he has not yet been found. After getting Kenny to hospital, we carried on with our search, and around midday we found the bodies of Fennell, Farrell and Killeen. We found Fennell and Farrell lying over the graves of 2 Balobas. Now, according to custom and tradition, they were killed in a ritual murder, and that is the 2 graves were 2 chiefs. And it seems that when a chief is killed, a slave's soul must be sent into the next world to look after his soul, one of his family or a prisoner. But my own personal opinion is, and God rest those men in heaven who were killed, as I know they now are. If they had stayed together and used their head, a lot more would be alive today, and if not, they would have killed at least 500 before they were killed. They had 6 Gustavs with 1,800 rounds, 2 Bren guns with 1,500 rounds, 2 rifles with 100 rounds. I will not say any more about the whole business, except to tell you I cannot find words to express my regret, as I know everyone who died personally, no more so than Gaynor. I was talking to Father Crowley here about a mass for the squadron dead, and we decided to wait until all our squadron personnel return home, please God, and then we can all attend. Also, A Company 33rd Battalion are having a mass said when we get back before the final breakup. Well, sir, I would like very much if you would keep all the photos of the funeral for me, as I would like to get the photographs when I get back. Also, I hope that some of the squadron are on the firing party. Give all the squadron my regards, especially CS Tuhig. I know he took it hard. Give your wife my regards. Cheers for the time being, until you hear from me again with much more happening news. Your old troublemaker, Salty. At Nyamba, the Irish were cut out. They had gone forward of their 2 Land Rovers to inspect the damaged bridge, and the Baluba war party, waiting in ambush for whites, got between them and their weapons in the parked vehicles. Their weapons, so close and yet so far. With what few weapons they had, they waited to be attacked, but already it was too late. They were hacked and bludgeoned to death, and Ireland mourned their loss. One aspect was to later play out in the favour of the Irish in the Congo. Despite the poor conditions, pay, accommodation, and equipment on the home front, they had been and were physically fit and very well trained, and such training was to stand them in good stead when next seriously challenged 1 year later. "Enemy attack has commenced. Please send strong reinforcements immediately," was the radio message sent from A Company, 35th Irish Battalion in Jadotville to the battalion headquarters 60 miles away in Elizabethville. Their earlier transmission, "Alert on here," radioed after an initial probing incident, was responded to with, "Defend yourself with maximum force." Now, the main attack had begun in earnest. The prelude to the ground assault was an intense, unexpected bombardment of mixed mortars, 75mm artillery shells, and heavy machine gun fire onto Irish positions. Then the onslaught proper began, with 500 infantry charged towards them in waves. By their sheer number and momentum alone, they looked set to overrun the Irish defences. Yet the peacekeepers defended themselves with every weapon available and every fibre of will they possessed. It was a hard place to be, but the Irish were up for the fight. It was now the turn of the Katanganese and mercenaries to be surprised. So stiff and efficient was the Irish resistance that the surge forward faltered, eased off, and the action was over. The Irish had held out. Dusk fell, and in the distance, to their delight, they heard the thump and thud of mortars, the rattle of machine guns. The relief of reinforcements was on the way, so they waited. They had only to wait. And wait, and wait, and wait. They waited 5 days fighting for their lives, and in the event, relief never came. I am, of course, referring to what became known as the Siege of Jadotville. And those men had first to battle for their lives and later to battle for their reputation. Surrounded in controversy as to why placed there in the first instance, on their way into Jadotville, the one Irish company, A Company, passed B Company Irish Battalion and a Swedish company on their way out, not wanted by the local inhabitants who they were sent to protect. So why then send another company? Why, when you've placed a company in a far-out position, would the UN choose to go on an offensive to capture mercenaries in Operation Mortar, an action that was bound to cause a reaction? Why were they not successfully supported or relieved? Why so badly treated when they got home? Command Quinlan, OCA Company, had intelligently and correctly sensed the way the wind was blowing on arrival and ordered his company to dig in, like any good company would in a conventional military-style operation. But this was peacekeeping. And then he oversaw the conduct of a highly successful company in defence, winning the 5-day battle, inflicting many dead on their attackers, but none dead in return. Only running out of food, water, and ammunition, no relief, the situation hopeless, did they agree to a ceasefire which was manipulated into a surrender. The Netflix film, Jamie Doran acting as Commandant Quinlan, will tell you the full story. But this military achievement, which would be celebrated by any other army, was swept under the carpet because of the perception of surrender, and those involved ignored. Their battle for recognition of their hard-fought, highly successful defence only bearing fruit in recent years when they received a medal, many not having lived to see vindication. The point being, militarily, they had proved themselves on the field. It took decades to prove themselves reputationally at home, but in the end, they won both battles. Going on the offensive in Elizabethville at the Battle of the Tunnel less than 2 months later is not typical of peacekeepers on a peacekeeping mission. But by now, the mandate with Irish soldiers already deployed had changed to one of peace enforcement. In the event, one more akin to all-out warfighting. The Irish had a stark introduction to what we call mission creep, and further Irish soldiers would fight and die. 120 members of a newly arriving A Company, 36th Battalion, approached to land at Luina Airport, Elizabethville on the 7th of December 1961. The United States Air Force Globemaster, on which they were arriving, came under ground fire, sustaining 48 bullet holes in the fuselage, 2 outboard fuel tanks punctured, and the oil system of its starboard engine damaged. Hostilities had begun, and A Company, on arrival, were already in the thick of it. For the 120 or so newly arriving members of 36th Battalion, their first impression was stark, yet this was only a small taste of what was to come. The following day, their camp was mortared. Corporal Mick Fallon was killed outright, and 5 were wounded, among them Sergeant Paddy Mulcahy. Katanganese gendarmerie, led by mercenaries, had become active and began serious efforts to curtail the UN forces' freedom of movement in Elizabethville. It is a principle that UN forces cannot concede, and confrontation was inevitable. Control of Elizabethville would have to be wrested back from the Katanganese and the mercenaries, and a crucial bottleneck, the tunnel, had to be resecured as it was the single access point to the cities, 2 kilometres either side of which was built up. So it was the vital valve controlling the flow to and from the city centre. It was in Katanganese hands, and the UN planned to get it back. Operation UNOCAT, an offensive operation, it was an advance-to-contact mission, which saw the UN force go way beyond peacekeeping, well into peace enforcement, and resulted in a conventional warfighting seize and hold operation of a high-value strategic target. A Company, under Commandant Joe Fitzpatrick, was the lead company. 36th Battalion, the lead battalion, of a brigade in attack plan, with an additional brigade encirclement. So we're talking about a divisional level operation. On the 16th of December 1961, Operation Starsfield, the Irish involvement of Operation UNOCAT, was commenced at 0400 under cover of darkness, and as it happened, an advantageous torrential downpour. The large-scale action commenced with Irish Bat conducting a 2-pronged attack, B Company from its newly won and costly held start line at Liège Crossroads, A Company infiltrating along the railway line, C Company in reserve. A Company advancing along the railway line, its axis of advance bringing itself stealthily onto the tunnel itself, and because of the topography presenting, it necessarily had a narrow frontage. More like this than this. Also on the tunnel, almost on the tunnel, they were rumbled. Fire was received, and Lieutenant Paddy Reardon and his radio man, Andy Wickham, were killed outright. The lead platoon thrown into disarray, the company stalled. Lieutenant Sean Norton brought his platoon to ground on the left flank, taking cover in the welcome folds of undulations of open space. Complete surprise almost achieved, the advance was stalled, the momentum and initiative lost. Hopelessly exposed, receiving incoming fire, number 2 platoon could not remain where they were, but they dared not budge. Ironically, to stay was to die, and to move brought the fear of dying. Lieutenant Sean Norton knew he had to get his platoon up and going, but there was a huge reluctance to do so on their part. Suffice to say, his get up and go got them up and going, and they took cover behind the building. Now he had to make fighters of the frightened. To have a fighting chance, Lieutenant Norton knew they had to cause events to happen faster than the defenders could react to them. So inevitably, he used his anti-tank support weapons to fire them back into the fight. Under fire, he ordered out from behind cover his 84mm anti-tank team, and they let loose a round onto the parapet of the tunnel itself. Now, the 84mm shoulder-mounted anti-tank gun has a signature backblast of flame, which in the darkness would highlight your position and invite incoming fire. So whatever about getting one round off, the gendarmeries and mercenaries were now alerted to the firing spot. So Lieutenant Norton, noting the impressive effect of the anti-tank round's first impact on the tunnel's parapet, was keen to continue using it, but he had to encourage a second firer to break cover to do so, but only by accompanying him out himself. This they did to good effect again and again, and it allowed his platoon advance and seize the tunnel area on which were railroad carriages in which were gendarmerie and mercenaries which needed to be cleared. And Lieutenant Peter Feely and a small squad set about this with grenades and Gustav machine guns. Now, the reality between the thought and the actuality can prove different, because the first grenade thrown by him did not go cleanly through the carriage window, as it might in movies, but instead hit its frame and bounced down into the tracks and failed to explode. It just lay there, waiting or not to go off. He looking at it looking at him. His decision now was whether to advance, regardless or not. He took a chance and did, successfully lobbing grenades through windows, spraying them with machine gun fire, and clearing the carriages. The tunnel was seized, and despite having later sustained heavy incoming bombardments, was held. Elizabethville was brought back under UN control. Now, there would be other encounters, incidents, and heroics, and throughout their peacekeeping involvement in the Congo, the Irish would suffer 27 fatalities. Irish soldiers and peacekeepers died in the Congo. Irish blood has been spilt on Congolese soil. Irish soldiers fought and died that peace and prosperity might have a chance to take hold in the Congo. Across the span of nearly 6 decades, I wish to acknowledge those peacekeeping pathfinders and say something that as a nation we shamefully do not. Thank you for your service. The Congo changed everything for the Defence Forces. Standards were professionalised, vital experience was gained, confidence was established. They were as good, if not better, than any other troop participatory nations. The importance of training, leadership, logistics was learned. However, the level of investment was not sustained, and the government allowed the chronic underfinancing of the Defence Forces to once again take hold. So that, only 5 years later, when the crisis in Northern Ireland erupted, the army was as poorly off as it was pre-Congo. Jonathan.
So we have a short film now, don't we?
Yeah. I wasn't in the Congo, so it's time we heard from 2 people who were.
We got news of Niemba. Now, it was a shocking news that some of our comrades had been killed in an ambush. And this news came out, and there was a darkness came over the whole company. And this lovely friendly nature with the Congolese, everybody's having to get fun with them and all that, it all kind of stopped. The Congolese felt it too because I had a staff there, and they he said to me, "It's got me, Chef. Chef, what's wrong?" You know. It was a terrible shock to the system that there's guys going home in coffins now, you know. And we were thinking again, the communication at home, what were the wives thinking now? I was out here, like, and people getting killed and children and all that, thinking of this thing. I remember I was put on, there was a radio station between the airport there and the little town of Comedeville, and we had a guard on it, and I was on guard at this radio station with a section there with him, and I started twisting knobs, which I shouldn't have, but I got Radio Brazzaville, and I got a lot of the information back about the ambush, more than we got through Radio Brazzaville. And eventually we got the funeral back from Dublin, and that changed the attitude of most of our fellows. There was a soreness came over everybody, that we had to watch them with the Congolese, that I thought we were going to blow up at one stage, you know, and it was a lot of tension. And so soldiers, maybe that's why we fight. Soldiers fight. You kill my comrade, I'll kill yours, you know, and that's this sort of the build up in the minds of the lads. There was a bad feeling there for a long time.
Pat Quinlan saved the lives of 120 of his soldiers by one thing, and that was realising that we were in trouble, even though he was told there was no trouble, there was nothing, no conflict, nothing was going to happen. He decided, when after a while, realising the circumstances and the build-up around the area, and with certain information that was given to him by one particular individual, a fellow called Charlie Carney, who was a Wexford man who was working in the mines, he gave him some information as to what was happening, that the Catanguese and the gendarmes and the mercenaries were streaming into Jadaville, and it was every chance that we would be under attack. Even though he passed these messages on to his headquarters, he was told there's no problem. On the 13th of September, the morning of the 13th, I was orderly officer. I got a message from headquarters in Elizabethville to say Operation Mortar had taken place and that all installations were captured, and to tell Commandant Quinlan. But prior to that, a couple of days before that, Commandant Quinlan had also given us instructions to dig in, and every single man was dug in on the morning of the 13th. And within an hour of that message coming in, we were under fire. We were under mortar fire, machine gun fire, heavy machine gun fire. First time ever, the first time our troops, young troops, average age, 18 years of age, some of them only 16 and a half, really boys. We went there as peacekeepers. We never went to have a conflict with anybody. And of all people, the Catanguese would be the last people we wanted to have any conflict with, because we had no axe to grind with them. But this morning, we were singled out. We came under the serious fire, and of course, after that, following day, we came under for the first time, and first time that the Irish Army ever had happened. We came under jet fire, where we were strafed and bombed. So we were bombed, strafed, machine gunned and mortared in the space of a week, with no chance. Two efforts were made to break through to us. Both of those failed. Our troops were totally exhausted at this stage. No food, no water. The water was cut. We didn't have water of our own. The professionalism, the heroism, and just the sheer camaraderie that evolved there on that particular way under fire. You begin to select people and say, my God, like this is, thank God we have these people. Thank God we have Pat Quinlan in charge of us. Thank God these soldiers, have stood up and very quickly from boys became men overnight.